yourself while you're presenting. So, okay, so I'm going to talk about European television, and I have to say that the concept of network and post-network television, as we know it from television studies, of course, doesn't really apply to European television, because in Europe, television is organized very differently than in the US. This has to do with production, also with financing, of course, broadcast and distribution. So I would say that the concept of network and post-network television somehow doesn't apply to European television. But I just don't care about that, so I just go on. When I talk about network or networks of television broadcasters, what I mean is, network as in broadcasters who cooperate with each other across borders. So that's my idea of networks in that sense. And what I'm going to present is not a written text, but it's part or a summary of something that I have written a few days ago, or a few weeks ago, and it has to do with television programs from the 1960s and from around 2000. It's a comparison, so it's a historical perspective, you could say, and I was interested in the way how television broadcasters work together in the past and work together now in a time when we have global television markets. Now, when television emerged in the beginning, it was organized along with radio as a national institution. However, because the production costs were very high, and there was a growing amount of broadcasting time that had to be filled, buying or exchanging television content became necessary just to fill the expanding schedule that emerged at the time. Like, I'm talking about the late 50s, early 60s. And so there was a kind of trade, and that was fostered by the European Broadcasting Union, EBU, which can be described as an alliance of European public broadcasters, and Alec can tell everything about the EBU, so if you have questions, ask him. So what do you say? Perfect, I know that. So there's Christian Henry Franke, who did research on the transnational activities within the EBU. And he points out that programs that were imported from abroad shared two characteristics. Firstly, programs which were marked by the lowest degree of national or cultural features were easiest to trade. And secondly, documentaries were generally considered to be the most suitable genre for programming exchange. Now, since I'm interested in television documentaries about history, or to be more precise, about the representation of National Socialism on television, I was really intrigued to find out that this cross-border programming exchange also included documentaries about World War II. Now, we know that since its emergence in the 19th century, the study of history is informed by nation-centrism, you could say. So nation-state, nationhood, national communities play a key role in the analysis of history. And we saw in the early 1960s that several television stations devoted big-budget documentary series to historical events that were key to their country's national identity and central to its memory culture. So I'm talking about the Great War in Great Britain, or the besetting here in the Netherlands, or das Dritte Reich in Germany. Huge projects, 10 to 20 episodes, a lot of money went into that. And they were all focusing on national history. Now, given the national centrism of history, and also, of course, the social function of television, of public television, I have to say, that had the mandate to serve the interests of society or a national community, you could say, the national perspective of these documentaries doesn't come as a surprise. From the outset, for example, of the Dutch program, The Besetting, the occupation, by the way, it's the translation. So this program was from its outset it was clear that its goal was to tell the story of the Second World War from a national Dutch perspective. So it was all about the Dutch experience of the Second World War, you could say. And you would expect that these programs, also the other programs from other countries, would not travel easily across borders because of their national perspective, you would suppose. However, and I stay with the example of the besetting, this program aired in 1966 on West German television. And I found really interesting to see that there was really a cooperation between West German television and the producer of the Dutch version, the besetting, Lou de Jong, because they cut back the 21-part series, original series, to 4 parts. And that was broadcast on German television to show how the war was experienced in the Netherlands from a Dutch perspective. So it would be really interesting to learn more about the production process, this cutting back, how they work together. And it would also be interesting to compare these 2 different versions. This is work that has to be done by somebody. So I think it would be really interesting to see if, for example, on West German television, we really had a Dutch perspective, or the Dutch perspective of the Second World War was presented. Now, what I found important for now is that already in the 1960s, European television stations cooperated and they exchanged television programming, but they also cooperated or co-produced programs, but this is of course another story. So this whole idea of there was a network of broadcasting stations, of public broadcasters who work together, this exists at least since the early 1960s. And they were really in, there was really strong, they were exchanging a lot of programming, they had a lot of discussions, so the network exists since the early 60s, you could say. Now we are we are more than 40 years later, but I want to draw on an example from 40 years later. In Europe, television there's also commercial television. We have a global television market, and the television industry is operating transnationally, you could say. Since I'm interested in the representation of history, I was wondering how this globalization, you could say, of the television market affected documentaries about the war. So after all, there's a tension between telling a national history, or story, national history in that sense, and also addressing a global audience. So nowadays, television programs are produced to be sold on a global television market. We know that from television formats, but this is also true for documentaries about history. And I was interested in how these programs look like if you produce a television documentary about history that was, or in the past was also always had a national perspective, how these television broadcasts look like now, what these programs look like now. So my example is the television program Hitler's Holocaust. It's produced by the German television broadcaster ZDF in 2000. And what I found interesting is that this program avoids presenting the events of World War II and the Holocaust from a national perspective. So there's no national perspective, I would say, in this program. What the program does, it tells a transnational story by integrating multiple perspectives. Now we have a lot of witnesses in these programs from different countries who talk in a variety of languages about their individual experience. Visually, these interviews are set in scene more or less identical, so there is no difference between, or the program doesn't differentiate where people come from. They all look like the same, they have all the same background, and we will see an example in a few minutes. And what is also interesting is that in the montage, fragments from these interviews are arranged in a way that it seems as if these witnesses talk or remember the very same event. And I will show you a clip or a short fragment or example from this program. What we are going to see is 2 witnesses who talk about a mass execution in Libau, and I have to warn you, you are going to see this mass execution. This so there's footage integrated. And this example shows shows the particular combination of interviews and footage that creates the impression of a shared memory. So we first, and I will show you the fragment from the German version of the documentary. We first see Fanny Siegel, and she recalls in her first statement how her father mentioned newly dug graves. Then she tells how her father was arrested and gave his watch to her because he had a sense that something will happen. And these two interview fragments are followed by 3 fragments from an interview with Karl-Heinz Mangelsen, who first describes the position from which he watched an execution. And then he explains that the prisoners had to walk to a pit. And then finally he regrets that he didn't report the shooting. And then the last fragment is again Fanny Siegel, who tells how she learned that her father died. And I'm going to show you this fragment. It's about 3 minutes, and it's the German version. I'm going to show you a fragment from the translated version later, but I think it's important that you first see like the original in that sense. And I haven't checked the sound, by the way, but I hope that it works.
Wahllos werden wehrfähigen Alter zusammengetrieben.
Wir waren 200 Leute und plötzlich kommen eine Fee, alle heraus. Mein Vater hat zu Weihnachten bekommen, er hat sich geküsst mit mir, hat eine Uhr gegeben, er hat gewusst, was ich erzählte.
Filmaufnahmen eines Marinesoldaten.
Kurzes gesehen, wenn Sie da abgegangen wurden. Ich war nur 160 Meter von der Stellung entfernt. Wir hatten einen Waldweg, grandioser Fahrzeug, kommt auf kommunales Zentrum. Ich musste diese 20, 30 Meter bis zur Kurve mussten wir hingehen und sie standen da, die Schützen bereit waren, mussten sie begehen, nicht. Das war eine schöne Weile mehr, wenn die oben noch in der Kante standen und mussten auch nicht.
Viele werden sorgen. Einer spricht zum ersten Mal. Lieber auch ist die Wahrheit nicht allerletztes.
Nimm ein Auto und bring die Tasche im Gefängnis, vielleicht nimmt man ja nicht zur Arbeit, es wird nicht auszeit, weil in Europa ist auch ein Donnerstag. Ich habe dann mit einem Mann, ich bin zum Gefängnis gegangen, dort war der Policeman, weil ich glaube, mein Vater hat meinen Eltern nicht hier gebracht, so war er nicht da. Gib meinen Vater, er heißt Meier Ulrich, den Mantel. Was der Mädchen war, von dem genommen, deinen Vater, seit gestern so ungefähr um 12 Uhr, dass der Mädchen ging nach Hause, mein Vater brauchte den Mantel.
Right. Now, what you see is that like these two different witnesses talk about what they experienced, and we have this footage in between, and this footage somehow intensifies this impression that they talk about the same event. So it is like they are telling what they saw, and we also see the footage. This is exactly what happened, and they, were part of that event, you could say. And this, of course, has also to do with the fact that the position of the witness coincides with the location of the camera, as the witness describes. And what we see here is that the program, in a way, creates a community of participants in history, you could say, where national belonging, for example, is not relevant at all. So what is also not relevant in that sense, or in that example, and also in other examples, is that there is a difference between victims and perpetrators. So we, for example, don't ask why was this guy Mandelson there at all. He was a soldier. Why was he standing there? So what this program does, it creates universal victims of war, you could say. That's all, no matter what nationality. Now, despite this program's transnational or universal perspective, what is necessary if you sell this program to another country is you have to reversion such a program, because there has to be a voiceover in a different language. This is what you call reversioning. The commentary voiceover has to be translated, and of course also the statements of the witnesses. Now, in the English version of this episode, there's a male voice that dubs Mangelson's statement. And this new translation interprets this statement sometimes in a military intonation, you could say, and sometimes in passing as a throwaway remark, you would say, which changes the whole atmosphere of the scene. And I'm going to show you just the last part of, or the three fragments of Mandelson's statement, just that you get an impression of what happens in such a reversioning. So this is Mandelson's statement in the English version. Also different music, by the way.
So we crossed through the wood, we got off the vehicle, and from there we could see everything. They had to go up to the grave, 20 or 30 meters, and they had to go where the executions were ready. There was always confusion. They were standing up on the edge and had to go down. There were many witnesses, but until recently, Parliament's Mandelson had remained silent. It's got to happen. I should have done something much earlier. If I'd said something immediately, perhaps it would have been cleared up.
Now you see that the translation and the intonation in a way changes the meaning and also the atmosphere, the whole situation, also how we relate to the witness, I would say. Like in the German version, you really feel empathy, and here he is kind of the bad German guy, you could say. And this is what happens when you reversion television programs. Now, reversioning is also necessary because of the length of an episode that has to be adapted to different programming standards. And if you reversion a program and make it longer or shorter, of course, you also have to rearrange different scenes. And this is where transnational television programs that have like no national perspective in the way of, you know, the choice of witnesses, where these programs are renationalized, you could say. And I have one other example from the same episode. So both the English and the German version present a short amateur film that shows a number of middle-aged men in front of their military tents. And they are busy with morning rituals like washing their faces, shaving, and things like that. So in the German version, the German version presents this scene in the context of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. And this camping scene, which I will show you, is followed by a witness stating that he was not at all aware of what happened to civilians in the conquered territory. And I'm not sure if which one is, yeah, this is the correct one. So this is the short scene. Now, so the question is, did they know what happened, you know, with the Jews? And then this guy says, no, we didn't know anything at all. Now, the English version presents these images after addressing the murderous activities of the Einsatzgruppen. The short film is preceded by testimonies of barbarity. So first, a German soldier, close to tears again, describes the killing of a young boy. Then another witness recounts how Jews were burned in a synagogue. And he says the next, and then the commentary says, or the voiceover says, the next morning soldiers of the 23rd Infantry Division carried on as usual. And therefore, or thereby implies that there is a sort of relation between what was described before and the man that you see here, you know, in this camping scene. So it becomes clear when you can compare these two scenes that the particular position of these scenes, and also, of course, how it is commented on, carries a kind of ideological implication. In the German version, the images show German soldiers who are having fun during the advance into the Soviet Union, whereas in the English version, we see the men who are responsible for the cruelties reported on a few seconds before. Now, in this Libau scene that I showed a few minutes ago, carries also a similar implication, could say. Not only does the translation change our understanding of the witness, like feeling empathy, or, you know, having this idea that he's the bad German guy, it also includes so the decision to include the last statement that is rather unintelligible is also kind of a political decision, you could say. Because in the late 1990s, there was a heated discussion or controversy in Germany about the role of the Wehrmacht, which was sparked by an exhibition about the army's systematic involvement in war crimes and in the Holocaust. And in this discussion, or in this situation, you could say the decision to include a German soldier who cries and who is like depicted as if he is a victim is in a way a political statement, you could say. So to conclude, I would say that historical television documentaries have traveled across borders since the 1960s, obviously. But like what we see now is with a global television market, that these documentaries somehow react to this global market by, on the one hand, presenting like transnational stories, but then in the process of reversioning, there is this paradox that suddenly these programs become even more national, you could say, than what we saw in the 60s. Thank you.